Hi guys, welcome to the second panel on Friday afternoon. This is the murder mystery 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock with Gail Williams or GB Williams, Val Penny and Jackie Baldwin. So we'll start with Gail Williams, GB Williams. She specialises in complex crime novels. She has 3 books in the Locked series: Locked Up, which was released in 2015, Locked in 2018, and Locked Down in 2019. And a recent book is the Chair. She also writes short stories, and it was shortlisted for the 2014 CWA, and it's now on the Last Cut Casebook. And she also does other short stories in other genres, including horror and erotica, which I found quite strange because I only know her as like writing crime books. And then we've got Jackie Baldwin, who writes the D.I. Frank Farrell and D.S. Clouds. And Jackie's debut novel, Dead Man's Prayer, was published by Killer Reads, which is an offshoot of HarperCollins in 2016. The second, Perfect Dead, was published in June 2018, and the third of the series, Average the Dead, was published last year in 2020. And then we've got Val Penny, based crime mysteries by Hunter Wilson. There's 5 books in that series. There's Hunter's Chase, Hunter's Revenge, Hunter's Force, Hunter's Blood, Hunter's Secret. And Val is an American author living in the southwest of Scotland. She has a law degree from Edinburgh University and a MSc from Labour University, and she has had many jobs in different areas. So I'm going to pass on to Gail, who's going to chair this event, just keep this event going. So off to you guys.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Well, we've just had our introduction, which I wasn't expecting. So first thing we said we were going to do is to read for the audience just a little bit from our blurbs for our chosen books. So, Jackie, do you want to start? You're on mute.
Yes, I know, I'm just taking it off. Right, so this is from not very good at spatial skills, Dead Man's Prayer. Ex-priest D.I. Frank Farrell has returned to his roots in Dumfries, only to be landed with a disturbing murder case. Even worse, Farrell knows the victim, Father Boyd, the man who forced him out of the priesthood 18 years earlier. With no leads, Farrell must delve into the old priest's past, one that is inextricably linked with his own. But his attention is diverted when a pair of twin boys go missing. The Dumfries police force recover one in an abandoned church, unharmed. But where is his brother? As Farrell investigates the 2 cases, he can't help but feel targeted. Is someone playing a sinister game? Or is he seeing patterns that don't exist? Either way, it's a game Farrell needs to win before he loses his grip on his sanity or someone else turns up dead.
Oh, very exciting. Val, you up next?
Right, yes. Well, the first book in my series is Hunter's Chase. And I'm really excited because that comes out as an audiobook quite soon. You'll be awfully delighted to know it's not me who's narrating it. We've got a professional narrator, a guy called Sean Pia. But let me read you the blurb. Detective Inspector Hunter Wilson knows there is a new supply of cocaine flooding his city, and he needs to find the source. But his attention is transferred to murder when a corpse is discovered in the grounds of a golf course. Shortly after the post-mortem, Hunter witnesses a second murder, but that is not the end of the slaughter. With a young woman's life also hanging in the balance, the last thing Hunter needs is a new man on his team, Detective Constable Tim Myerscough, the son of his nemesis, the former Chief Constable Sir Peter Myerscough. Hunter's perseverance and patience are put to the test time after time in this first novel in the Edinburgh Crime series. Hunter by name, hunter by nature, D.I. Hunter Wilson will not rest until Edinburgh is safe.
Fantastic. I have to say thank you, because I read the book and I was calling him Myers Cough. It's Myers.
Well, there you go.
Did not know. As Lindsay said, the book I'm talking about today is The Chair. This is a one-off, a standalone, which is after my series of the Locked series. So the blurb from this: on a snowbound Cadair Idris, death comes stalking. Cobb retreated to Cadair Idris for a solitary life of peace and quiet, and to escape his dangerous past. Though that illusion starts to crumble after he and Baldwin Jones, the local vet, find a mysterious RTA victim and shelter him in Cobb's home. When elements of London's criminal underbelly reaches Wales, and their presence throws the close-knit community into stark relief, the chance to settle old scores could prove too tempting. With no choice but to try and hide the RTA victim from people who want to kill him, Cobb's not sure he's ready to rejoin the world he's running from, when that means putting another woman in the firing line. Meanwhile, Baldwin's not sure she can face the revelation of her own darkest secret. But as they face the final showdown, a race over the snowed-in mountain, will anyone survive unscathed? That's it. Right, to get on to the more interesting part for anybody listening. One of the things that I found when I read your two books, and obviously knowing mine, is we've all picked a really strong theme of family into ours. So we've all used it in very different ways. First, a general question: why do you think so many people do go for family in crime novels? Jackie?
Well, funnily enough, Gail, until you pointed it out, I hadn't actually realised that was a theme in my work. But once you said it, it immediately hit home, and I thought, oh gosh, so it is. Yes, certainly in my first novel, Dead Man's Prayer, I think Frank Farrell is very much estranged from his mother, so he's coming back to his hometown, and he's with half a mind to heal that fracture between them. She's a very cold, bitter woman, and basically she wanted a priest more than she wanted a son. So when he left the priesthood, she just cut him off. That was it. So she's very, very harsh, and he hasn't had much nurture. And then, of course, he was a Roman Catholic priest before he entered the police, and for reasons that are gone into in the book, he was, forcibly ejected from that family, his family of brothers, you could say. So then, that was another, almost like a bereavement for him, to have that, family snatched away. And of course, I suppose, when he comes down to Dumfries, he starts effectively to build another family, like a nascent police family, with the members of his team. And so, yes, I don't know why it is that we all, probably because we are all family members ourselves, and we all have our own family dynamics, and have been exposed to those of our friends and whatnot over the years. So I suppose it is something that probably operates at quite a subliminal and unconscious level. Certainly for me, not to even realise that I had that as quite a strong theme in my work. I think it must be quite unconscious to some degree. Yes.
Val, what's your take on it?
Well, it's interesting. When I was reading Jackie's book, which I loved, by the way, your main character is a former priest. My main character is the son of a Church of Scotland minister. And so you have not just the family dynamics, but also the religious and backgrounds, if you like. And the working title for Hunter's Chase was Sins of the Father, because the idea was that there were three characters who were having to bear the sins of their fathers. One being Tim Myers-Coe, one being Jamie Thompson, and the third being Frankie Hope. The other side of the coin is shown in Hunter Wilson's family, because it's he who needs to bear the sins of his son, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think Jackie's absolutely right when she says that we're all parts of groups and parts of families, and everybody, authors and readers alike, can relate to those dynamics in some way or another.
Yeah.
What about you, Gail?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think family is incredibly important, even if you don't actually have one. That sense that you need to belong somewhere. So I don't think it matters how functional, dysfunctional, happy, miserable. You can have families who hate one another. It's still really important in every single person's life, and also, particularly if you look back over the last year, how badly wrong families can go internally, but also how incredibly right they can do. A lot of characters do have good home lives. They don't tend to appear too much in crime fiction for obvious reasons, but they, you have to have that background. If you look like something like Midsummer Murders, they can only do what they do because they go home to loving wives and families. So I just think one of the reasons that a lot of people talk about what happens within families is the strong bond that you have, good or bad, but also the way that you do rally around each other. You will close ranks, if you like. So I just always think families are really fertile ground to commit murder, probably. So what I found interesting with yours, Jackie, was the idea of duality. As you said, the idea of Mrs. Farrell, or she wanted her son to be a priest more than she wanted her son. And then, of course, there's the issue with the twins comes through. So what was it about the idea of twins that really attracted to you? Was it the family idea, or was it the religious idea that brought you into the twins?
I think from when I was a kid reading books myself, twins absolutely fascinated me. If I could have paid good money to be a twin, I would have done it. It's just, I'm absolutely fascinated by them. I think and I was also, one of the other themes in my book is like nature versus nurture. So I think, there's been psychological studies done over the years where they look at separated twins and how the impact of their differing upbringings has changed them psychologically. They started off half of a single. I'm talking about identical twins rather than fraternal. So I find that whole thing really quite absorbing. So I think for me, that's why I wanted to have the twins. And the killer has his own reasons for also being a bit compelled and fascinated by the twin experience. So he treats them very differently. Most people treat twins the same clothes, the same hair, and try and almost make them two halves of a whole. And this killer is all about, if you like, celebrating the differences, and very much, treats them differently, and they have different, fates in store, shall we say.
Yes, definitely. I love the whole twin aspect of it. Val, your families were quite different in many respects, because you talk a lot about there are family, there are blood relations as well as the known families. But it seemed to me as well there was quite a lot of family that had nothing to do with blood. So, like with you mentioned Hunter is actually going the other way. He's the father trying to atone for his son's sins. But we don't hear about that till quite late in the book. So what was that aspect of family for you? Why did you bring that in?
I think the main reason is that my own father died when I was quite young, and so I didn't know him terribly well. And it is always interesting to me to watch the dynamics between parents and children, but particularly fathers and children, because I didn't understand that dynamic growing up. I grew up in an all-female household with 3 generations of women who didn't really like each other. And I went to an all-girls school. So men and fathers were a completely unknown species to me until I went to high school in Colorado, which was a mixed high school. And then there were all these guys, and I thought, oh gosh, what on earth are they? But you're right. You have not only the blood relatives in my book, but you have the team in the same way that you have in Jackie's novel. Hunter leads his team almost like he would lead a family. And I think also it's interesting to see family dynamics. You see Tim's family, you see his girlfriend's family, and you see the prejudices and undertones of Edinburgh society, which are long-standing and not necessarily pleasant, but there to this day.
But you also had that really great dynamic of Annie and her father, because even though he turns, well, we know, you and I know, I don't want to give any spoilers.
Sure.
But that is such an incredible dynamic. For all his faults, he couldn't love that girl more, could he?
Absolutely so. Absolutely so. And Joe, Annie's dad, was actually the first character that I created in that book.
All right.
Because he came from one phrase that a girl in one of my offices used. She was a trainee lawyer, and my firm did no criminal law. And so I sent her to a friend of mine who did nothing but criminal law. And when she came back, she said to me, "Oh, it's lovely to see the clients before you smell them." And that was the background to Joe Johnson, because he is a pathetic, smelly little man. But as you say, Gail, he just loves the bones of Annie.
Yeah, that's a very Scottish phrase. I've never heard that one before until I started reading Scottish books.
But what about your book?
Well, mine's incredibly down the dysfunctional side. A lot of the family there is only Branwen Jones and her father. They live together on the mountain. They work together. It's much more of a working relationship, I think, than a working family relationship. Her father is quite controlling. That's why Branwen is still where she is in Cadaridris. She's there because she's a vet, and therefore she's useful on the farm, and therefore she has been kept there. And she's been brought up with a really strong sense of duty, that she belongs there, that she owes her family that she should stay there. And it's really kind of trapped her there. It's a kind of abuse in some ways, because she really wants to spread her wings and be elsewhere. And that's part of what she does through the book. She proves herself to have a really good sense of duty and of family. And there are family dynamics within the village that actually aren't very real, because the amount of illegitimacy around, if you didn't talk to the one who was illegitimate in the village, you wouldn't talk to any of them. But that also came as a quite an interesting thing for me to write about, is because I'm not illegitimate, I have parents and sisters, and to find out that even when you don't like and you don't necessarily acknowledge that your family is your family, you still stand up for them. Because there is a moment in this book, the bit that I refer to as the scene in the pub, although there are several scenes in the pub, that you really find out it doesn't matter whether you're blood or not, whether you love or you hate your family, you stay together and you don't let outsiders attack. So I think that was the part of family that I loved, that bonding. That was what I wanted to really show in this.
Blood is really thicker than water, isn't it?
Yeah, but sometimes not as costly.
I liked your rescue team as well. That's another kind of family, really. She had one was leading, really, isn't it?
Yes, that part of the family as well. But you also have that with Cobb, who is the male protagonist in this. He had his family. Something's happened with his family before the book starts, which is why he's gone to look for solitude. But he seems to forget that he has the brother in his ex-boss and the guy he used to work with. And the dynamics of that change quite a bit through the book as well. So there is an awful lot of family in this. And it was actually part of what made me write it, is because I've come from, you can probably tell from the accent, I'm actually English, not Welsh, for all that I write in Wales and write about the Welsh. I see a very different dynamic in the way that people treat their families down the southeast to the way that they treat them here in Wales. And neither one's better, they're just different. And that's part of what I wanted to explore, the differences of those families. So, yeah. The other thing that all of us have in common is we all have a really good sense of setting. Now, I'm going to start with Val on this, then move to Jackie, and then talk about my own. But there's a reason why I want to do that. Val, Edinburgh, very in ranking, but very city. So what attracted you to writing about Edinburgh?
Well, when I first started writing, I was suffering from cancer.
Oh.
And I was exhausted by the treatment. And I don't know if you've noticed, but daytime television has very little to offer long term.
Yeah.
So the only thing I had the energy to do was to read.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began a book blog to review the books that I read. And then I got a little better. And my poor, long-suffering husband had to listen to me saying, I'm so bored, but I've got no energy to do anything, and I can't go out, and I can't do this, and I can't do that. And he said to me, well, look, he said, if you know so much about writing a book, why don't you go ahead and write one? And I thought, oh, well, maybe I could. And then I thought about Peter Robinson's books, because he created a whole town of Eastvale, which is everywhere and nowhere in Yorkshire. And I thought, well, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should create my own town. And then I thought, no, I know Edinburgh really well. I lived there for so many years. And I thought, Edinburgh is a small city. It's only 500,000 people. Everybody knows everybody else. And so I could have this layering of society where it was realistic that people knew each other. But also there are universities, there are concert halls, there's a prison. I can have anything I like happen in Edinburgh, but my characters can get across the city quickly. And so that's why I eventually chose Edinburgh. And it's worked out really well, because now that I no longer live in Edinburgh, I can go back with ease and walk the streets and visit the places that my characters visit and enjoy the haunts that they go to. And it's so much fun just to visit. I have an excuse to visit such a beautiful city.
Oh, lovely. Funnily enough, I love Edinburgh myself. I've been up there many, many times. But oddly enough, one of the other places that I've been in Scotland is Dumfries, which I was... so when I started reading Dead Man's Prayer, I was quite surprised. I thought, oh, I've been in that street. And it was quite quite interesting. I felt a real connection with it. So, Jackie, again, why did you pick Dumfries? Why have you gone, instead of like, you've gone for a town centre rather than a big city? What attracted you?
Well, it's funny you should say you've been there, because Dumfries really suffers for people kind of say, oh yes, I've been past it, rather than to it. And we have the most beautiful countryside down there, forests, sea, miles and miles of coastline, and so many lovely little towns, the main town of which is Dumfries. So I thought, might as well fly the flag for my hometown, as it were.
That's your hometown? I didn't realise that.
Yes, I've lived in Dumfries just about most of my life, in fact, apart from being away to study. And I've recently moved up to Edinburgh, funnily enough, or close to Edinburgh. But Dumfries was kind of very much in my bones, so to speak. And the only other writer that I'm aware of that was doing crime fiction set down in Dumfries and Galloway is Aileen Templeton, who writes the most marvellous books. So I thought, well, it's not exactly a crowded field down here, so I'll just get my little pennyworth in and put Dumfries on the map, as it were. So yes, I knew it very well. At the time, I had a job in small kids when I first started writing it. And, I just didn't have the luxury of going off on research trips or anything. So I decided just to, use what was on my doorstep. I was a bit conflicted about it in a way, because I thought, gosh, people are going to be all over with me like a rash if there's any inconsistencies. But I decided what to do is, if I said anything bad or impolite about a place or a road or an estate, I gave it a fictional name. Because I thought, I wouldn't like having my street or house or whatever trashed in a novel sort of thing. So that was the little compromise I made of myself. And I thought, the purists would be all over me about it, but funnily enough, it seems to work. And I've literally had no objections from anyone that lives there at all. In fact, they quite seem to like that. That was the reason. There's plenty of places to hide a body, but it's also, there's lots of empty space, more than you can imagine. I think as well, it's still big enough to have a criminal underbelly, and it's got that thing about a small town that everybody knows your business. A bit like what Val was saying, but on a much smaller scale. Like, you could literally be appearing in court and someone or are even related to appears in the dock behind you, and you just kind of slither down in your seat. So that kind of gives another dimension to it, in that he's coming across people he was at school with, and whose lives have taken a very different turn. All that kind of different dynamic, really. So yeah.
One of the things I got from your book as well is there's been quite a cultural shift, I think, across the whole of the country. One of the things that you feature, because obviously you've got the religious undertones as well, is abandoned churches.
Yes.
Or kirks, I should say. Really, So did you find that as well? Did you have to create that in your books, or is that something that's there in Dumfries and around you?
Yes, it is. There's a lot of abandoned churches, and in fact I did have a very specific one in mind when I created that scene with the twins. Yes, sadly the populations have just dwindled, and so many of them are just beautiful wee buildings. They're usually quite small, quite petite, but some of them are quite exquisite, and it is a shame seeing them all boarded up and not being really used as the sort of congregations are contracting. But Church of Scotland ones, really, I mean, in Dumfries there's only actually 2 Catholic churches, which obviously is where Farrell comes in. And I gave, because of something rather nasty that happens in one of them, I gave it a different name, but I have one of them very much in mind when I was writing the scene. I won't say which one.
Actually, that's something I meant to ask you, Val, because one of the things that I thought, again, you brought out was you've got a very diverse population within your book. You've got Myers Co. Is that what's right?
Myers Co. Yes.
Top end, rich, well known. Yeah. The pillar of the society. And then you've got the salt of the earth, or the sort of the underclass with Joe and his family and those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But they almost seem to live on top of one another. You know, they don't seem to have a great distance between where one lives and where the other lives. Now, is that my misreading, or is that what Edinburgh is like?
No, it is very much what Edinburgh is like. And you'll find it in a lot of cities, Gail. I know when I lived in New York, it used to really surprise me that you could be in, Madison Avenue one minute and go around the corner and you were in a much less salubrious neighborhood. And Edinburgh is very much the same. Morningside, which is where Tim Myers Co lives, is always thought of as a very well-heeled part of the city, a very wealthy part of the city, and much of it is. But there are small flats and dark tenements and narrow streets in parts of Morningside, just as there are in many other parts of the city. So yes, it's quite different. But certainly setting's terribly important in your book, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is everything in my book. I say I come from the southeast of England, so I know London reasonably well. So part of the book is actually set in London, but it's what happens in London has this huge impact over in Wales. Now, the reason that I've come to Wales is actually these things, mobile phones. They're the bane of most people's lives, and because the story starts with a hacker, his idea is then to get somewhere that hasn't got that connection. And as a lot of people in the middle of Wales will tell you, we might have them aerial masts, but you go down into the dips in the valleys, in the mountains, and you can't necessarily use them. So it came obvious to me that I needed to take my guys somewhere that they wouldn't necessarily have that connection. And then I decided to really turn them over by putting a mast central to the farm. But that was the whole point. I needed people to be isolated. I wanted them to be out of the comfort zone. To me, there's actually quite a lot of parallels between the stark grey and rocky landscape of a mountain and the stark grey concrete landscape of a city. Because one of the things I found, having moved from between the two, is actually you can be far lonelier in a city where there are thousands and thousands of people than you can on a mountain where there's one or two. And again, that's something I wanted to bring out. So setting is hugely important. But like Jackie, I did that thing where I don't want to insult North Wales. Actually, Cadair Idris is gorgeous. I've never walked up there, but of all the things I've ever had to research for my books, and I've done some strange books, so I've had to research a lot of weird things, Cadair Idris took me more time to actually look at, to get the maps out, to view them, to understand where the paths went, how that you would shelter on Cadair Idris, and it's absolutely fascinating stuff. And there were stories that I found about Cadair Idris that I was so tempted to put in the book, but they would have expanded it beyond the story that I wanted to write. But they may well come up sometime at the time. You never know. But yeah, that was for me. I needed that wilderness. In fact, the chair was originally called Wildernet, and then somebody I know came out with a book called Wilderness. So I thought, no, I better change the name of this one then. The chair, by the way, is Cadair Idris, because Cadair Idris in Welsh means the chair of Idris. So yeah, a setting was hugely important. But Pen y Cwm, which is the village in here, does not exist. What I wanted to do with that is I wanted, as Jackie said, I wanted it to be the Welsh village that you've all known, heard of, without it being stereotypical. So Pen y Cwm itself doesn't exist. Don't go looking for these people because they're not real. But do come looking at Cadair Idris and all the bits around Snowdonia, because it is fantastic. It is breathtaking. There are some places where it is soft and kind and wonderful, and then the weather turns like that, and it's horrible and it's terrifying. But it's got a personality all of its own, and I hope that some of that personality comes out in the book, because I do love it. And for you guys who are listening to this, there's a comment section. So if any of you got any comments, please, questions, please put them in the comment section. We'll get to them afterwards. But yeah, I thought setting was everything. It, I think, was actually came to me before some of the characters. So yeah, so we've got everything from city with Val, we've got small town with Jackie, and you've got absolute mountains and wilderness with the chair. So that, if we've got family and we've got settings, the next thing we need to talk about is our main characters, because they will all have been affected by both. So Val, Hunter, very, very clever man, obviously a good detective. I have one question specifically about Hunter that comes up in the book, but I'll ask that after. So what's your inspiration for Hunter? Where did he come from?
Oh gosh. When I was writing the book, at that time my mother still lived in Edinburgh, and my husband and I used to drive through to see her. And when we got to the top of Morningside Road, before we turned right into the Grange, there was a lawyer's office, and the lawyer's office was Wilson Hunter's. And I said to Dave, my husband, "That's a great name for my detective." And he went, "Oh, don't use that name." He said, "He'll sue." I said, "No, I'm sure he won't." He said, "Well, don't use it anyway." So I flipped the name round and made it Hunter Wilson. And Hunter Wilson had to be someone I could depend on. If I had a problem, he would be the man that I would go to solve it. He is fair, he's dependable, and he's kind, but he also has a streak of impatience that makes sure that he gets things done as fast as is humanly possible. Early on in the book, we find out that he was particularly unkindly thought of by Tim Myers-Coe's father when he was his boss. And that runs deep with Hunter. But he's a fair man, so he doesn't carry it forward with Tim.
Mm.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, that does come across. It's also one of the things that I wanted to ask you about. There are two resignations in the book, and with the second one, the way Hunter reacted, I thought, oh, that doesn't feel like Hunter to me. So I had to ask you, is that reaction actually reverse psychology?
Oh, yes, absolutely so. Yes, he's making life difficult for Tim to show him that he really does want to stay in the force.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's definitely what I thought it was, but it's not so clear. I was like, please don't be horrible. Right. Okay. So similarly, Frank, I kind of fell a little bit in love with Frank, I have to say, Frank Farrell. What gave you the idea to move him from being a priest to a police officer? It's not the career move that's obvious.
No, but I think you could look upon it as, he's had this very much obviously is Catholic, which is quite a dramatic religion in a way. Because I was at a Catholic convent school, the local one, when I was young, and it's back in the day when it was very fire and brimstone and the flames of hell licking at your feet, and it's very dramatic. You're learning about people being literally torn limb from limb and all this kind of thing. It was high drama. It was like watching a melodrama in a way. And I think, so it was very much about fighting evil, the whole priesthood thing. You know, you're very much, you know, fighting the devil, as it were. And therefore I kind of took him to fight. He had a nervous breakdown, and he was unable to continue in the priesthood for reasons that are, you know, I think I'd had a nervous breakdown too. But they basically, you know, he's pushed out. And I think he then, when he healed, I think he then perhaps saw the police as fighting evil on the secular rather than the spiritual plane. So there was a bit of an internal logic about it for him. Yes. So I think that was why he chose to do that. He still saw it as you know, the triumph of good over evil, I suppose you could say,
Well,
in
I
his
think,
mind.
yeah, well, that is what crime is all. Crime fiction, anyway, is all about. It's
Yeah,
always the
yeah.
bad guys do. The bad guys always lose.
Uh-huh.
But what was it about the priest? Was it the story? Because obviously it suits the story wonderfully.
Uh-huh.
Was it the story that brought you a policeman who is an ex-priest, or was it the ex-priest becoming a policeman that brought you the story?
Yeah, it was the latter, I think. Like when I was at that school, it was an enclosed Benedictine order that ran it, and basically we had a Jesuit priest in the school who was very tall and very commanding, and I don't think I ever saw him smile the whole time he was there. If a bunch of, you know, sort of, you know, giggling schoolgirls, I'm perhaps not surprised. It was probably a major penance him even being in the building, but yeah, I think it was the severity of him. I think he was a former Jesuit, and he had a long robe, you know, that kind of whispered as he walked, and he was very mysterious. So I suppose it kind of seized my imagination, because there just seemed a very different vibe from the likes of a vicar or a minister who's like leads by and large a fairly normal life. They get married, have children, in a very active role in the community. But that experience in my young years of the priest was that they were very other, very mysterious, you know, very set apart, and they presided over these sacraments, you know, that literally, when you're little and you take things so literally, made me think when I was getting my first Holy Communion, I was actually being a cannibal. You know, so all of this in a very febrile imagination, as a child, you know, was sort of, you know, ricocheting around the head, and it was very much Big Brother is watching you as well, I suppose. You know, God was watching you. God could hear every thought you had. You were, oh, don't listen, you know, to my thoughts. So yes, there was a lot going on as a child growing up with that, because, you know, it just made your imagination sizzle, really.
Yeah.
So I think I probably wanted to explore some of that apartness that can't quite. It's almost like there's a veil between the priests and the rest of the people. Like you know, and that veil's sometimes almost transparent and almost nothing at all, and other times it can be more opaque. And I think, you know, I like the whole idea of combining that with a little bit of social awkwardness, and this whole. I tried to convey a bit of the apartness of Frank Farrell in the book. You know, even though he's capable of forming really good relationships, he still, you know, struggles a little. You know, he's not one of the, you know, down at the pub lad type people.
He's not worldly, is he?
No, he likes to listen to his Gregorian chants and, you know, all that kind of thing. So he is a bit of he's a bit of an outsider, and the outsiders always interest me.
Yeah, that's where my two come in, really. They are quite outsiders. That's one of the things with Cobb, was he has a military background. And I'm not giving anything away, really. He lost his wife before. The tragedy that happens, he loses his wife before he comes up to Wales. But he's actually terrified of making any more of those connections. So the reason that he's in Penycumb where he is he literally got in his car, drove, and Penycumb is where the petrol ran out. So that's why he stayed on Cadair Idris, just because it is that isolated and alone. and that's all he wants. He just wants to be left alone. And then Branwen Jones comes along, and has been left alone far too much of her life, and she won't let it, because it's one of those cases she can see it's not good for him. If it's not what he wants, but it's what he needs, and she does become what he needs. But what she doesn't admit to herself for quite a lot of the book is she needs him too. She needs somebody who's strong and capable and will love her for what she is. So I think, my main characters came just from that whole need of not being isolated anymore. If you've got a family around you, that there is duty there for Branwen. Certainly her duty to her family is more than the love for the family. It's not that she doesn't care for them, because she does, but it is duty that keeps her there, and she needs more than that. So that's where she came from. And then Cobb is just, whereas the hacker in it is trying not to make digital connections, Cobb is trying not to make human connections. So that's where he came from, and the military made sense for that, and the losing a spouse made sense for that. And where that came from, I'm not really sure, because none of this is in my background at all. So I find that quite odd, that I get characters appear in my head, and they sometimes they come in full blown, and sometimes they sort of like nudge their way in. Branwen was definitely more of a nudge. She's sort of like, oh, have I got to do this? I'll come. Oh right, I'll come and do that then. Cobb was like, I'm a shadow over here, and I'm not talking to you. So Cobb took a long time to reveal himself to me, let alone on the page. So yeah, it was an interesting creation. The guys who actually came to me quickest were all the bad guys. They were much easier to write than any of the good guys. And the one that I kind of have a soft spot for is not Shoreham, because Shoreham's just horrible. It's his pal Baron, because Baron isn't a bad guy. He's doing what he's doing because it makes him money, because it's easy, because he can live like it, and because with his background that was all that he had the chance to do. But he's not a bad guy, because he actually tells Branwen how to save herself, and he does. So he's sort of not exactly an anti-hero, but he's a more rounded guy, because he's neither good nor bad. He works in shadows and he works in greys, and I love that. And I found that much easier to write in some respects than the good guys, which I think is when I got into crime anyway. So yeah, those characters.
Having said that, Bob is a very realistic character. He may have taken you a long time, but my husband does have a military background, and I've met Cobb. I know who he is and how he thinks, and it was really interesting. It's interesting to hear how hard he was for you to write.
Yeah, I don't have a military background, don't know many military people. Though oddly enough, if I go into a conference anywhere, which I used to for work, you could always guarantee the first bloke I spoke to was either military or a copper. I don't know what it is. I seem to attract those kind of people. Though oddly enough, my husband is neither.
It's funny what you were saying about Cobb, though, the fact that he was very much a bit standoffish and took a while to reveal himself to you, because that's actually his trajectory with your female character as well, isn't it? Yeah. So it actually mirrored your own discovery of him as her discovery of him in the book, really.
Yeah, I do sometimes think my characters, they're not my characters, they are. Yeah, it makes me sound like I've got real mental health issues. I do, but they're not me. They obviously they are me. They are part of me. They are facets of me, because they come out of my imagination. But sometimes it is like I'm talking to another person in the room, and I have to learn to them. I have another set of, but I also write steampunk books. I have another set of books, a series of 5 out, and the guy who ends up the ultimate hero, I didn't even know he was Jewish until book 2. And it's just like, oh, right, you're Jewish. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And everything I'd written in book 1 makes sense for him to have been Jewish. I just didn't realise. And that's how I find that's how characters come to me. That sometimes they develop along the way. So yeah, they don't all. I have had characters who basically come knocking on my head and say, just write me, and I have, and they're there. But I actually do prefer the ones who they take getting getting to know, getting used to figuring out what they're doing. Do you guys as well find that characters don't do what you want them to? They'll go off and do something. Well, I didn't intend you to do that. Do you have that? Go on, Jackie, you said something, but you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, yeah, sometimes, you know, sometimes you think you know them and then they just develop in a slightly different direction. Yeah, yes, I have experienced that, I would say. You know, because when I first started writing Farrell, it was very different to the Farrell in the book, because he had this austere kind of very serious model, and he ended up, he's got a sense of humour, you know, and I couldn't squash the sense of humour, so it just had to kind of stay, because it just wouldn't be written that way, the way I'd intended to write him. It kind of overpowered me a bit and became a little different. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Val? Have you found that they've gone off and done on their own thing?
Absolutely. I mean, when I first met Joe, he was really a most unpleasant, unsavory character in every way. But then when he introduced me to his daughter, all of a sudden he was so much more than that, so much more of a rounded person.
Yeah.
And he became more real, because none of us are single-faceted.
No, I found, honestly enough, I know people like Joe. They haven't had a good time in life here. The poor guy couldn't catch a break if he tried, could he? And it does drive them down, and it's not a nice thing to watch happening to a guy. But to me, that made him one of the more real people in the book. And similarly, some of the stuff that you've done to other characters, it was very much not. No one in there is like black or white, which I don't think any of us are really. So, got 10 more minutes here. What's next, girls? What are you coming up to next? Jackie? You're on mute.
Yes, I'm actually writing a PI series with a female lead this time, set on Portobello Beach in Edinburgh, funnily enough. I mentioned I'd recently moved up here, but the trouble is I've been a bit stymied with lockdown, because I'm in East Lothian and I'm not meant to travel into, you know, literally it's just 20 odd miles away, but it's in the next local authority area, so I'm really winging it with my setting. So at some point I'm going to have to, once this is uplifted, I'll be running about, you know, because I'm on the second book in the series now, and I think, oh no, I'm going to be building error upon error, so I'm going to be running about trying to sort that out. But yes, it's a female PI, and she's got a very tragic backstory. Yeah, so that's what it's about. But I'm trying to make it cozy and not go dark, which is a real challenge for me.
I know that feeling. Google Earth. I recommend Google Earth. I'm all for everyone on Google. So
yeah.
So is the first book out, or is it?
No, the first book's with an agent just now, and I'm writing the second book at the minute. Yeah.
You've got 3 of Frank Farrell. Is there any more of those to come?
I would very much like to write more, but it very much depends on sales. You know what it's like, so we'll have to wait. I'm taking a break from them just now, anyway.
Okay. And for you, Val, we got more Hunter, because you've got 5, is it?
We've got 5 in the series so far. The 6th in the series, Hunter's Rules, will be out by the end of this year. And I'm also writing a second series which centres around my character, Detective Sergeant Jane Rennick, who lives with her civil partner, Rachel Anderson, in Bruntsfield, which is another interesting part of Edinburgh. And Rachel and Jane will be the main characters in the new series. And that book, the first in the series, will be out in the early part of the summer.
Lovely.
But the most exciting thing is that the audiobook of Hunter's Chase is coming out next month. And I'm so excited about that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Because a lot of people who don't like to read books like to listen to books. And so I'm hoping that that will bring Hunter to a new audience.
I'm a big fan of audiobooks. As I know there's a lot of controversy. Some people say, oh, it's not the same experience as reading. Well, no, it's not the same experience as reading because you're listening. But if you're actually actively listening, and particularly, I find them really good because I work on screens all the time. I get an awful lot of eye ache, so I have them of an evening, and just particularly when I go to bed, and just stick the earplugs in and I listen. And to me, in some ways, it's actually better for me than reading the book because I can let my imagination fly just as easily. So I'm quite jealous that you're out on audiobook because they are fantastic. Because Jackie, you're on audio as well, aren't you? Not on Audible, but on audio.
All three of mine have just come out as well, but the thing I like about it as well, Val, is it means our work's accessible to the visually impaired now, because my dad was, all but blind, really. So I think I'm really particularly happy that my work can now be heard, and it means, that people, that are visually impaired have access to it, which I think is really great, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah,
absolutely. One of my husband's military friends all but lost his sight in conflict, and it was because of him that I really wanted to push to get my books into audio for exactly that reason, Jackie.
Fantastic. Well, I've done the Locked series. I've got this standalone. I've very nearly finished another standalone that I've got to try and find a publisher for. But what I'm really going for at the moment is I have a potential series based in, of all places, Merthyr Tydfil. So yeah, it's more of a town because the nice thing is I don't know if most people have heard of Merthyr Tydfil, but they don't know where it is or what it's like. But it is a central hub of it's a very large town. It's I probably the equivalent of Dumfries. I've never looked at the two populations, but what's nice about it is you go in one direction and you're in the Brecon Beacons. You go in the opposite direction and you're in Cardiff, which is big city time. So there's an awful lot of spread of different stories, different types of landscape, and all of that to bring in. So I'm really looking forward to that, and fingers crossed finding a publisher for it because can never guarantee the publishers are going to love it. So,
but that's exciting.
I know. I've nearly finished it. It's got the last edit that I do before I start sending it off, and hopefully some publisher will pick it up.
So, all the best of that, Gail.
Thank you. It looks like we're running out of time then. Lindsay.
So, I mean, you've got 2 minutes left if you want to continue talking, because I just found it very interesting. It's nice to hear from different perspectives, different areas. Obviously, Dumfries and Galloway is like the sort of like village, Highland, well, not Highlands, but lowlands. You've got Edinburgh, and you've got like Wales, sort of a different sort of take on like crime, which is great because crime fiction includes different places and also different, like, how the backstories of being, like, I mean, a priest, a police officer, that kind of thing. They didn't all do their usual, just like straight out of school, straight into Tully, so the Scottish ones.
If I can risk being a bit business-like, then Bloody Scotland is going on, I think, this year, is it not? Yeah. Yeah. Well, Wales has its first crime festival coming up. We have we are starting 26th of April. I'm actually on the very first one on that festival as well. It will be Martin Edwards, who's the ex-chair of CWA, Kathy Ace, who is a writer. She's Welsh by birth, but she's living over in Canada now, and myself. So we're going to be one of the first events up, but it's a whole digital event, all free. all available. Go through Eventbrite and you can get free tickets. So that will take us up this year, and then next year, please God and COVID forgiving, we will actually be having our first physical Crime Cymru event in Aberystwyth. So that's, I haven't got the dates for that off the top of my head. I should be advertising this properly. But yeah, look out for Grill Crime Cymru.
Definitely. Sounds really interesting. It's lovely to see that, though, that Bloody Scotland has started the grassroots, because everybody knows Thurston, they're peculiar, but then a lot of people, Harrogate is quite expensive. I've looked at it a few times and I thought, oh my God, that is quite expensive, that travelling from Scotland, if you're not an author and you're not an event kind of thing. It'd be lovely to go, but I mean, Bloody Scotland is absolutely great. And it's nice just to see these like grassroots ones popping up, that you include local authors that don't get the big shout outs at the big book festivals, because now you find that unfortunately a lot of them have to, no offence if anyone watching the programs, they have to go for the big names, the ones they know that are going to sell the tickets, and there's been a lot now that just don't feature the new, unless they're up and coming and a big splash and like the Guardian or taken notice of. It is hard to see them like appearing on festivals. So
well, that's one of the things that Grill Crime Cymru have done very well. I think we've got some of the big names. I again don't want to reel them off just in case I've got the wrong names off the top of my head. But with every single one panel that you've got, when you've got a panel, they've always made sure that they've got a Crime Cymru member. So you are talking about the smaller names, people like me who are out here, but we don't have the marketing budget to be a big bestseller. So yeah, we're going to be mixing that up quite nicely. So please come and attend the free festivals this year by virtual, and then Aberystwyth next year.
So that is now 4 o'clock, it's actually a minute past. So I'm just going to say the next event is 6 to 7. So that gives you time to get your snacks, your tea, and get ready. So that is Paul Tulin, Graham Smith and Colin Garrow, and that's Murder and Mail. So that'll be quite interesting. So we'll see you at 7 o'clock for that one. So thank you very much, ladies, for being part of this, and I hope you had a good time. And I can't wait to hear read the next book in your series, because I like a good book. I mean, I got work and I spend my lunchtime reading Kindles, and I was like, Lindsay, what are you doing? I need to read. It's time in the bus, time in the car, and time just to chill and relax. So yep, I'm looking forward to reading more.
Well, thank you for having us, Lindsay.